So first of all, this video falls under the Fair Use clause of the Copyright Act for educational and entertainment purposes for my subscribers. So this is what's been seen on, I guess it's right-wing cable news on Fox News. We've got a guy here, Tom Harris, with Laura Ingraham, and Tom's going to tell us that there's no climate crisis. So let's hear what he's got to say.
The most maddening part of all of that, though, is that these policies, they're not just destroying lives, they're rooted in lies, all of them. Our next guest was once a climate alarmist, but now says the entire movement is, quote, a scam. Tom Harris is the executive director of the International Climate Science Coalition. He joins me now. Tom, good to see you tonight. Now, you actually say the only way to get rid of this is to go after the science of climate change. Explain.
So just a little bit of context around that. I think Laura here has been talking about the policies that have been put in place in the States regarding fossil fuels and subsidies for climate change, climate or green energy sources, that kind of thing. And she's saying that, you know, that the people are hurting, high inflation, all that kind of stuff. And Tom here, his credentials, if you like, are that he used to believe in the climate crisis being a real thing, and he no longer does, and he's calling the whole thing a scam, which means he's calling the IPCC a scam. He's also calling most of the governments around the world a scam. So it's a big claim from Tom here. I'd like to see him back it up. You know, good luck with that, Tom. Let's have a look.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people will say, well, you know, Canada, for example, puts out so little greenhouse gas emissions that we shouldn't actually try to reduce it because China is double the United States. Well, the trouble is people argue that, well, yes, but we have to set an example to the world and we have to be good citizens and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and you were saying that you were going to present some sort of scientific evidence, I guess, or some kind of scientific report, some science to counter the science. That was what Laura was introduced you as some kind of expert in the field who's uncovered some kind of evidence, scientific evidence that the majority of the world these days is on the wrong path. And here we are muddying the waters with Canada's carbon footprint not being the same as China's carbon footprint. Yeah, so far, Tom, you're pretty unimpressive.
So they're using these arguments quite often that China's doubled the emissions of the US, et cetera. But the real underlying thing is that there is no climate crisis.
Yeah, okay, that's an assertion on your part there, which flies in the face of numerous reports from the IPCC. For example, I've got issues with those IPCC reports myself. Okay, don't get me wrong on that point, Tom. But so far that you've muddied the waters, and now you've made a bald-faced assertion with nothing to back it up. And there is the weight of the majority of the scientists around the world who are studying the climate. So the majority of the climatologists around the world who've been studying this for 40 odd years or longer. If you look at Exxon Mobil's history into it, they've known for decades earlier that there's an issue with CO2 emissions. So where's the science here, Tom?
You know, I was originally an aerospace engineer, and I would give speeches and I wrote articles. I wrote one in the Ottawa Citizen about comparative planetology, how studying the planets helps us understand the Earth better. And I used the example of the runaway greenhouse effect on Venus. I said, this could happen on the Earth if we don't reduce carbon dioxide. Well, a local professor at Carleton University, professor of geology, he liked my article so much he used it in his course on climate change. But he said to the students, but that part about Venus is wrong. What happened on Venus cannot physically happen on the Earth, and he explained why.
Yeah. So there you go. Tom here is a astrophysicist. So he's pontificating about the climate, as astrophysicists normally do. So he's talking about comparative climatology. In other words, he's looked at other planets within our solar system, because by the looks of him, in his day, there were no exoplanets discovered. So he only had Venus really to go on. And of course, Venus is very different to the Earth in the same way that Mars is very different to the Earth. And of course, the history of those three planets are very different. And this geology professor is quite right in saying that what happened on Venus is more than likely not going to happen on the Earth, because we've got the liquid water for a start on the planet, which is completely different to Venus. Venus has not had liquid water; it's too close to the sun for that. So, you know. My contention here is going to an astrophysicist for climate information was comparable to going to a vet for a medical exam. Right, a vet, he's very knowledgeable about aspects of medicine. Right? Make no mistake, they're very knowledgeable about it, but they're treating many species, which is why they need to understand medicine quite deeply, right? So, but if you actually want to get advice for your medical condition, you go to your GP, first port of call, right? Your general practitioner. Then he can assess the situation and point you in the direction of the nearest expert in treating your condition, if he can't treat it himself. So going to an astrophysicist about the climate and changes in the climate and whether or not this is a crisis or not is the wrong person to go to. I'm all for the science, don't get me wrong. Get the climatologists onto your friggin' news shows, interview them about the climate. Don't interview these I don't know who I don't know Tom's background. But he did say he was an astrophysicist, not a climatologist. So if we want to know about climate, let's go to the climatologists. It's a very simple thing.
Now, I thought, who is this climate change denier? Well, he invited me into his lab and he showed me the geologic history that he and others are finding, and they found no consistent correlation between carbon dioxide and Earth's temperature. At times, CO2 was 1,300% of today, and we were stuck in very cold conditions. So it was all over the board.
Yeah, no, it wasn't all over the board, mate. So he's talking about a graph, and I've looked on the internet just briefly here. I haven't been able to find it. There is a correlation between atmospheric CO2 concentrations and the interglacial glacial cycle that the Earth has gone through. Now, there is one anomaly, which is the one he's pointing out there. Where the correlation didn't follow the interglacial pattern. So he is right in saying that there was a high concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, and at the same time the Earth was in a glacial period. In other words, it was cold. So there was a high concentration of CO2 and it was cold. One time in the Earth's history has that happened. Everything else has been is quite a good correlation between CO2 concentrations and the interglacial cycle, Milankovitch cycle, I think they call it. So the exception doesn't disprove the rule. And now, correlation doesn't mean causation as well. So it's still not known whether the CO2 has affected the interglacial or the interglacial has affected the CO2. So we don't know. But what we do know, without a doubt, is that the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere today have not been, as they are, 420 parts per million in the last 4 million years. So we know that for a fact. Now, the Milankovitch cycle, so the cycle of glaciation and interglacial periods, appears to have been disrupted in the Anthropocene period, which we're currently in. That is what the science is saying that appears to be the case. We don't know for certain. What we do know is climate change is happening, and we can measure it, and it's happening, and CO2 concentrations are high, 420 parts per million. No sign of them getting any less either. I'll just put that in there. So let's carry on with what Tom's got to say. But he's definitely throwing in some spurious data that he has yet to come up with science. Put it that way.
So I started wondering, well, maybe he's right. He exposed me to a lot of people who actually showed me that there are thousands of scientists. And here's a book actually that illustrates that. It's called Climate Change Reconsidered. And this is on climatechangereconsidered.org. There are thousands of references here which talk about the fact that there is no foundation to the climate scare. It's all based on models that don't work.
It's not all based on models that don't work. It's based on empirical field science. Like Dr. Peter Wadhams has spent 40 years studying the Arctic, and that's the area of the Earth that is changing the quickest, right? So, and like he is just one amongst countless scientists, if you want to bandy numbers of scientists around, because the fact of the matter is it doesn't matter how many scientists are telling the same story, okay? It matters about the facts and the empirical evidence. That's what matters. And the scientists around the world writing these peer-reviewed papers in reputable journals that are being collated by the IPCC, and the governments around the world are implementing policy based on what the IPCC is saying. That's the facts, Tom. Okay, so you can say that you've got a book. I mean, I can hold up a book and say that it contains some information, so fucking what, mate? All right. We're talking about body of work over a considerable period of time that is all pointing in the same direction, that the climate is changing and it is happening faster than anticipated. Right? This is the latest findings, is that the climate change is happening and it's faster than we thought it would happen. Now, you bring in the models that don't work. Well, they do actually work, and they're getting better and better because we're getting better and better data into them. Okay, so you can throw your models don't work fallacy out with the rest of your book, mate.
But Tom, when you hear politicos especially, but not just the politicos, celebrities, it's settled science. Science is settled. Is science ever settled, really? I mean, except over time where you really, what is H2O? We know what H2O is, right? We understand that. But
Yeah.
is this science settled really quickly?
No, in fact, it's a very immature science. In fact, we don't even know whether it's going to warm or cool in the future. Various people who study the sun, for example, Dr. Patterson, they show that we're headed into a grand solar minimum around 2060, and that we'll see gradual cooling over the next few decades.
Is science ever settled? Well, not really. Okay, to take Laura's point there, yes, we do know about H2O. Okay, we know quite a bit about H2O, but we also know a lot of other foundational aspects to all kinds of fields of science, and it's due to empirical measurement in a lot of cases. Okay, some of it's theoretical or deduced from the evidence. In different fields. That's the way science works. But we can say more than just water molecules are made up of H2O as far as science goes. Okay, so this, and Tom is right, this is an immature field of study. That's correct. Okay, and there is room for improvement, definitely. Okay, I'm not saying that it's all over, but let's have a look at your solar. We're heading into a grand solar minimum. Well, we're actually, Tom, if you want to know about it, we're in a solar minimum now. Okay, and right now, 2022. All right, and to even be talking about this in frickin' October 2022 is ridiculous, Tom. All right, to be bandying this bullshit around that you're spewing here, Tom, is ridiculous in 2022. Okay, I'm just going to make that point. That's my opinion. Okay, solar minimum, and what does the solar minimum mean? It means sunspots. Sunspot activity on the sun is at a minimum, and there's something like a decadal cycle. It's slightly more than a decade for sunspots. And sunspot activity on the sun, and we know for a fact, you can take this to the bank, Tom, sunspot activity has nothing to do with climate change. Now we know that for a fact because we're in a solar minimum now and the temperature is continuing to rise. So make of that what you will. You can get your grand solar minimum in 60 years' time. You can shove it up your frickin' ass, crusty old bastard, one to another, okay?
So the bottom line is we have no clue what's going to really happen. So the only sensible approach is to get ready for it, to make our infrastructure hardened, to use solid, dependable sources of energy like coal. This is a piece of coal from eastern Kentucky. And not to turn off our solid, reliable energy sources for flimsy wind and solar power. You know, you'd laugh. It's appropriate that I'm based here in Ottawa because right now here in Ottawa, Canada, they're running a municipal election. And it is the most corrupt election I have ever seen. God. They are trying their best to bring in a climate alarmist as mayor. So guess who they put in charge of the 4 debates they've had? Climate activists. They have climate activists running the mayor's debate.
Professor, it doesn't surprise me that this is happening in Canada, it's happening in the United States, and we need real facts to discern what the real truth is here. Professor, thank you for this invaluable work that you're doing.
So you're going to fight the climate crisis, the climate alarmists with science, are you, Tom? I didn't see any of it. You didn't present anything. You waved a book around. There was no facts given at all, right? What you've said there, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, so we need to harden our infrastructure. Well, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, does it? We don't know what's going to happen in the future, so we better do this. I think you're a bit of a fucking idiot, really, aren't you? Waving your coal around. Yeah, look, we've seen, it's pretty obvious that the transition between the current energy sources, the current fossil fuel economies that we're running and the transition into clean, green power sources is fraught with problems. Making the wrong decision around that is going to cause untold misery in the worst case. That's without a doubt. Okay, now coal has got to be part of the picture for quite some time yet, in my opinion. I don't like it, but that's reality. Same with oil. What can you do? If you're going to get into the battery technology, you're going to have all sorts of problems with child labour in the Congo and just environmental catastrophe left, right and centre. And then you've got the looming catastrophe when you've got all the batteries no longer usable, and having to do something with them there. So there's major issues that are facing us. But having an idiot wave around a chunk of coal and claim that it's all about sunspot activity, and therefore I've got really nothing to add to the conversation, Tom, have you? You've certainly got no facts on the ground about whether or not climate change is, and I notice that you're not actually challenging whether or not the climate is changing. Okay, you've left that one behind. That went out the door with Moncton, who was using that same bullshit about the CO2 and the interglacial. He had his graphs out there showing that as well. It's just ludicrous rubbish. Okay, so enough of that side of things. Let's focus on what the issues are, and there's economic issues and there's environmental issues. They're intertwined. What we don't need are the politicians jumping on the bandwagon. Like we saw the politicians take the lead from the scientists during COVID, for whatever reason that was, but they were certainly happy to step back and let the scientists run the show. Now, they weren't doing their jobs, okay? They weren't managing the crisis, right? So that was that. The way they handled COVID was wrong, but parts of it can be utilised in the climate issues, all right? So let's stop with the politics with the coal industry and the fossil fuel industry. That has got to be phased out. Has to be. It should have been done decades ago, but it wasn't. So let's stop with the sunspot activity being the problem with climate change, because it's not. Okay, just leave that one out now, right? And let's focus on how we can transition comfortably and easily and without untold misery from a carbon-based economy to some other based economy. I don't know what the future holds. No one does, but let's have a look at it and let's try and get there. And the models are right. Just stop with the crap. Please. Anyway, if you like this video, please subscribe and like and share it. Get the word out. I've got to try and do my bit, and if you can possibly donate, if you can afford to a couple of bucks a month, then by all means, let's put some skin in the game and get going.